Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding your home reduced to dust, your family scattered, and the world debating not whether you deserve safety, but what to call your suffering. This is the reality for millions in Gaza, where life and death hang not only on bombs and blockades, but on the words the world chooses to use or avoid. In the corridors of power, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is often discussed in the language of geopolitics: borders, ceasefires, security guarantees, and diplomatic roadmaps. But in the narrow streets of Gaza City and the battered towns of the West Bank, the language is different. It is spoken in whispers over rubble, in the cries of a mother searching for her child, in the silence of a father who has run out of answers. For decades, political negotiations have promised an end to the conflict, yet for the civilians living within it, peace has remained an abstraction. The debates in international forums may center on treaties and territorial lines, but in Gaza, the questions are far more immediate. Will there be food tomorrow? Will the water be drinkable? Will the next airstrike hit my home? The human impact of this war is measured not in diplomatic communiques, but in the empty seats at dinner tables. More than half of Gaza's population is under the age of 18, and for many of them, childhood has been consumed by a cycle of siege and bombardment. Schools have become shelters, playgrounds are buried under debris, hospitals, strained and under-resourced, have turned into triage centers for the wounded. The politics that dominate headlines often obscure the small details of ordinary life, details that, when pieced together, reveal the real cost of the conflict. There is the taxi driver who lost his only source of income when his car was destroyed, the shopkeeper whose store was flattened by a missile, the grandmother who carries photographs of her grandchildren because they are all she has left. These are not statistics, they are human stories, each one a reminder that behind every news report lies a web of personal tragedies. Critics of the term genocide may focus on legal interpretations, on whether the violence fits a precise definition under international law. Supporters may cite patterns of systematic destruction as evidence, but amid the debate, those caught in the crossfire are rarely given the same attention. For them, the semantics matter far less than survival. Journalists on the ground have described the same scenes again and again: families huddled together in makeshift tents, queues for bread that stretch for blocks, the eerie quiet after a bombing when everyone waits to see who will emerge from the dust. Such images cut through political spin because they speak a universal language: the instinct to protect one's family, the grief of loss, the fear of what comes next. To focus solely on the politics is to risk reducing the people of Palestine to mere subjects in a strategic chess game. But when the politics fade, as they inevitably will in the cycles of history, what will remain are the human stories. The mother's empty arms, the father's unanswered prayers, and the enduring question, could it have been different if the world had seen them first, before the politics? The word *genocide* carries a weight unlike any other in international law. It is the charge reserved for humanity's darkest chapters: the Holocaust, Rwanda, Srebrenica. Its power lies not only in the horror it conveys, but in the obligations it creates. Under the United Nations Genocide Convention of 1948, nations are bound to act if genocide is proven. In the case of Palestine, that single word has become both a legal battleground and a moral dividing line. At the International Court of Justice in The Hague, lawyers have debated whether Israel's military campaign in Gaza meets the criteria: the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. South Africa, leading the charge, argues that the evidence is overwhelming: thousands of civilian deaths, the targeting of vital infrastructure, the cutting off of food and medical supplies, all inflicted upon a population that cannot flee. Israeli officials reject the accusation, calling it an attempt to weaponize the term and insisting their operations target Hamas, not the Palestinian people. The legal threshold is high, and proving intent, the deliberate desire to destroy a group, is often the most difficult element. This is where much of the debate lies. Proponents of the genocide claim point to statements from some Israeli political leaders that, in their view, reveal such intent. Critics counter that those remarks do not reflect official policy, and that the war is a response to deadly attacks carried out by Hamas on Israeli civilians. Meanwhile, human rights groups document the mounting toll. Gaza's hospitals are overwhelmed. Neighborhoods have been flattened. Families are displaced in numbers unseen in generations. Whether one calls it genocide, ethnic cleansing, or war crimes, the human consequences are unmistakable. Language in this context is not academic. If the term *genocide* sticks, it could alter international alliances, reshape public opinion, and trigger legal obligations for states that have so far remained on the sidelines. If it does not, critics fear it will become another example of the world looking away until it is too late. For many Palestinians, however, the debate feels distant, almost irrelevant. They can argue about the words. One displaced mother told reporters, "But we are still the ones burying our children." Her words cut to the heart of the matter. While diplomats spar over definitions, the people most affected are focused simply on survival. The fight over terminology reflects a larger truth, that naming an atrocity is often as contentious as stopping it. Yet history suggests that names matter. The crimes that go unnamed have a way of repeating themselves. And so, the question remains, is the world witnessing genocide in Palestine, or is this a war whose devastation stops just short of the legal threshold? For those on the ground, the answer may not change the reality they face, but for the rest of the world, the answer could change everything. In Gaza, there is no safe place left to run. The United Nations says it plainly. More than 80% of the population has been displaced, many more than once. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to dust, forcing families to carry what they can, a mattress, a water jug, a few photographs, as they move from one temporary refuge to another. The humanitarian crisis is vast, but it is also intimate. It is the child curled up on the floor of a school, turned shelter, the mother boiling weeds for dinner because the markets have nothing left to sell, the father who waits in a line for water that might not arrive. Before the latest escalation, Gaza's infrastructure was already fragile under a blockade that restricted the movement of goods and people. Now hospitals have been bombed, power lines severed, water pipes shattered, doctors operate by flashlight. Incubators for premature babies run on dwindling fuel supplies. And with border crossings often closed or heavily restricted, aid convoys trickle in far too slowly to meet the need. The numbers tell a grim story. Humanitarian agencies report tens of thousands of injuries and an ever-rising death toll. More than 500,000 people face catastrophic food insecurity, meaning they are at risk of starvation. The health system, once strained, is now on the verge of collapse. Infectious diseases are spreading in overcrowded shelters where families share a single bathroom and clean water is scarce. Aid workers describe the situation as one of the most severe humanitarian emergencies in recent memory. "We've seen wars, we've seen disasters," one UN official said, "but rarely on this scale, with so little room for people to escape." Even funerals, once private moments of grief, have become hurried affairs. In some cases, bodies are buried in mass graves because there is neither time nor space for individual burials. The dead are often mourned in silence because public gatherings risk drawing fire. International appeals for ceasefires and humanitarian corridors have met with partial, temporary pauses in fighting, but each lull is followed by renewed violence. The result is a cycle in which relief arrives in fragments, never enough to address the totality of need. The world's attention is divided, focused one week on the diplomacy in New York or Brussels. the next on images of destruction posted to social media. But for those inside Gaza, the crisis is unrelenting. There is no pause from hunger, no break from thirst, no safe window in which to rebuild. Some residents still speak of hope, though it feels fragile, almost forbidden. "We tell our children that tomorrow will be better," one father said. But inside, we are not sure if tomorrow will come. If wars are judged by their human cost, then Gaza's crisis has already written its verdict. The only question now is whether the world will act before what remains is beyond saving. In the grand halls of the United Nations, diplomats speak of international norms, shared humanity, and the rules-based order. In Gaza, the rules are different. Survival is the only law that matters, and every day it is being broken. The idea of global responsibility is not new. It is woven into the United Nations Charter, reaffirmed after genocides in Rwanda and Srebrenica, and codified in the responsibility to protect doctrine. These principles suggest that when civilians face mass atrocities, the world has both a moral and legal duty to intervene not only with words, but with action. Yet in the case of Palestine, the gap between principle and practice has never been more visible. Statements of deep concern pour in from foreign ministries. Emergency sessions are convened. Resolutions are drafted, debated, and more often than not, vetoed. Meanwhile, the violence continues. Part of the paralysis lies in politics. The United States, Israel's most steadfast ally, has repeatedly shielded it from binding resolutions in the Security Council, citing Israel's right to defend itself. Other countries, including several in the global south, have called for immediate ceasefires and independent investigations, accusing powerful states of double standards. In between are nations that speak in cautious language, fearful of alienating either side. This diplomatic stalemate has consequences far beyond the Middle East. For many in the Arab world and in countries long subject to colonial rule, the inaction confirms a suspicion that international law is applied selectively depending on the alliances of accused. Human rights organizations warn that such perceptions erode the credibility of global institutions, making it harder to address future crises. In refugee camps and bombed-out neighborhoods, global responsibility feels like an abstract promise that never arrives. They talk about protecting civilians. One displaced teacher in Rafah said, "But all I see are more graves. Some efforts are being made." Humanitarian aid trickles in from UN agencies, the Red Cross, and a handful of governments. Civil society groups in cities from London to Jakarta organize protests and fundraisers. But the scale of need is far beyond what charity alone can address. Without coordinated political will, the crisis deepens and the death toll rises. The history of mass atrocities is littered with postscript apologies, leaders expressing regret that they did not act sooner. But regret after the fact is no comfort to the dead. The true test of global responsibility is not in the promises made when the smoke clears, but in the courage to act while the fires are still burning. Future generations will ask not just what happened in Gaza, but what the world did or failed to do when the chance to save lives was still within reach. History takes notes and it does not forget. There comes a point in every crisis when the question shifts from what happened to what will we do ? For Gaza, that moment is now. The scenes are no longer unfamiliar. Children carried from rubble, hospitals overwhelmed with the wounded, families lining up for bread and water under the watch of drones. The images flash across screens worldwide, but they risk becoming background noise, one more tragedy in an age of constant crises. The danger is that familiarity breeds not compassion, but fatigue. A moral call to action begins by rejecting that fatigue. It insists that the suffering of distant strangers is no less urgent than the suffering of those next door. It understands that morality is not a matter of proximity, but of principle. History has a habit of judging the bystanders as harshly as the perpetrators. After the Holocaust, the question was asked, asterisk, how could so many know and do nothing? Asterisk, after Rwanda, the refrain was, asterisk, never again. Asterisk, yet here we are, once again watching as civilians pay the price of political stalemate and military force. The people of Gaza cannot wait for perfect diplomacy. They cannot wait for legal verdicts years in the making. Their need is immediate, for safety, for shelter, for the chance to live beyond the next air raid. That urgency demands more than statements of concern. It calls for tangible steps, protecting civilians by halting indiscriminate attacks, opening humanitarian corridors, pressuring all parties to respect international law. It requires that citizens around the world push their governments to act, and that those governments have the courage to place human lives above strategic interests. Silence in this context is not neutral. It is a choice, one that communicates to the powerful that the suffering of the powerless can be endured, even ignored. To say nothing is to say that this is acceptable. Moral clarity is not the same as political simplicity. One can condemn attacks on civilians in Israel and still demand that Palestinians not be collectively punished. One can acknowledge the complexity of the conflict and still insist that human rights are non-negotiable. The call to action is not about choosing sides in a geopolitical struggle, but about choosing humanity in the face of its erosion. Around the world, ordinary people are answering that call in their own ways, marching in streets, donating to relief efforts, amplifying voices from the ground. Their actions may not end the war tomorrow, but they keep the crisis from disappearing into silence. The question that will linger long after the dust settles is simple. Asterisk, when the moment came, did we speak? Did we act? Asterisk, in the end, the silence of those who could have helped will speak just as loudly as the bombs that fell. The world is listening, and history is too.